a few countries, Indonesia, Nepal, where young people that feel, as has previous generations have felt, that the representatives do not speak for them, or there's a gap between the people and the representative. There's a gap. Then the gap has gotten too big that the young people say enough is enough. We have to reset. And we have to reset the system. But they didn't gravitate to other forms of governance. They didn't go to autocracy, one man to rule all. They didn't go to oligarchy. They didn't go to aristocracy.
Much better form of democracy.
They went to, they said, we want to say in democracy.
I think that people always misconstrue the entire discussion about democracy. Is they love to treat the understanding of democracy as the West speaking in a monolithic sense. Like they're speaking in unison of what democracy should be and what is the shape of democracy. Well, actually, it's quite an ecclesiastical shapes and forms of arguments regarding what democracy is. No, what does it mean? Okay. No. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, welcome to our third installment of Sidang by KSI. Hi, I'm Luqman.
Inside, reflection on the ASEAN episode.
The ASEAN episode, one thing I can notice in the ASEAN episode is under the podcast that we uploaded in YouTube, there's one or two comments saying that, oh, Syabas anak muda, we are explaining ASEAN quite well. I think even though at this stage we are talking to ourselves still, but I think maybe like along the way, when we look back at the episode, we're gonna see how much that we improve. But one thing that is indeed working is how we really unpack the idea of ASEAN, how it came to be. How about you, Zaim?
Whatever we do today will be the same thing as what we'll do next month or next year. And I always think that it's going to be better over time. And most importantly, I just enjoy doing this for fun.
Mm-hmm.
No expectation of viewership or engagement, as long as we add or try to add value.
One thing we must realize in the whole project of advancing human civilization and adding efforts and value to the project of enriching human understanding, even every single little thing, they add up. And we don't know, maybe somewhere, somehow later in the future, that some people might find it very, very useful, maybe for their research, maybe another perspective that people hadn't really talked about. So that's the power of two unqualified experts.
Positioning for Sidang.
Yes. Yeah.
You're going to lead the presentation for the sharing for today. And today we are looking at the question of democracy. Do we actually need democracy or just better systems of governance? What do you think of?
When I think about the question of democracy, the question of whether we need another system or another alternative system, I'm reminded by a 60 Minutes interview, I think done in early 2000s between the BBC and also, no, it's not 60 Minutes, it's Hard Talk by BBC, between BBC and also Mahathir. During that time, mainly they are discussing about legacy and Mahathir's comments about the administration of the late Abdullah Badawi. And one of the things that really struck me as something relevant we are discussing to what we are discussing today is on the question of democracy. During the session, the BBC presenter asked Mahathir, if I'm not mistaken, to answer about allegation of his dictatorial practices and authoritarian practices. I mean, we shouldn't beat around the bush. He is pretty notorious in this kind of polemic of whether he is really a dictator or authoritarian figure. But one thing that he raised is, he said that democracy has existed for how many years? Really, in practice, I think it's less than 500 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Less.
But the dynasties of ancient Egypt, they have existed for how many thousands of years? And during that time, it is the most stable kind of form of government as compared to democracy. I mean, if we look at the project, the execution between the democratic government and government that are indeed absolutists in essence, you can see that the difference is quite stark. Quite often we have more recorded instances of democratic government failing compared to authoritarian or dictatorial government. Now I must say that to make this clear that I'm not totally 100% on the side of Mahathir.
Sure.
I'm not really advocating for any instances of dictatorial powers, something of sorts. But I'm saying that he make a pretty astute observation to what kind of government existed in the world and how it is actually guided not by um utopian vision or idealism, but the shape of the government is actually given by the material condition of the people. In like if I'm not mistaken, the book Guns, Germs and Steel. Although there's some detractors saying that the book is pretty obtuse in its observation, but I think the main point that the book told us is actually the material conditions, and there are a lot of other factors other than idealism that give shape to how a civilization arrange itself. Like at the time, the speed of information actually gives shape to how a government would be governed, because it necessitates a type of government that are very loose but also very centralized in its order. Like we couldn't even imagine like how do, say for example, ancient Egypt manage itself with the speed of the information, the speed of literally the speed of horse between regions, and how they would govern. Even there's a major lagging of information, asymmetry of information. Well, what happens in the other periphery of the government might reach at most 4 or 5 days to the center. Coming back to your question, which is we need democracy. Is that what is democracy? I think it is much better for us to understand first, like, what do we mean by democracy? Democracy as an idea is very different thing than the democracy in execution. During the ancient Greece, the idea of democracy is hindered by the ability of a male citizen to vote. But now we have extremely expanded the question.
Athenian male.
Mhm.
Even then, also they have to have some type of condition. I think land owning or something like that.
Mhm.
In the agora of ancient Athens can vote on major issues, which I think at the time was groundbreaking. But it didn't last a long time. They were eventually, I believe, conquered by the neighboring powers, and democracy ended. So that was the earliest form of democracy. What is democracy before we talk about the new one?
Yeah, I'm jump together. Right. So, to get back to basics,
Yeah.
democracy is understanding it literally. It literally means the rule of the people. And for the most part of human history, the rule of the people is regarded as some sort of a very idealist utopian idea. Like how can the people rule together and decide on a certain policy? And during the time of ancient Greek, well, this kind of idea has been experimented with some level of deviation to what we understand democracy is now. So now, the if I may, you can jump in. I'm not really understand this in terms of the nitty gritty of the essence of democracy. There are quite a few pillars of what democracy really means. So the key pillars are three: the popular sovereignty, elections, representation. Second is rule of law and basic rights, which is a speech, association, and press. And the third one is a political equality, which is one person, one vote. So these three mix up the entire idea of what democracy is. Democracy will always be about the mandate of the governed. Right. And it goes back to the understanding of how a state should be, and that's how the concept of social contract came to be. It's quite different from the Malaysian understanding of social contract. Yeah, because it's purely like 100% racial, but in the bigger political science term, the social contract is actually about what legitimizes the power of the state. Where do state derive its power? And the state derive its power from the consent of the governed. And how do you get the consent of the government? Well, by these three pillars, which is the popular sovereignty, election and representation, rule of law and basic rights, and political equality. Now, this represent the very basic um, building block of what democracy is. Maybe something that you want to join in, give some shape to what the idea of democracy is.
People like to quote Abraham Lincoln, president of the US. He said famously that democracy is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But unfortunately, democracy actually is a contested term. It actually means different things to different people. North Korea calls itself democratic. I think around the world, there's only maybe a handful of countries, less than 10, that don't call themselves democracies. So there are even definition of democracy varies. And Luqman's point, you're right, that the 3 points. I'll just add one more to the fourth is active citizenry, civic participation, that citizens join and contribute to the discourse. So in between elections, you also participate in the discourse. And just insight, people like to talk about ancient Athens as the foundation. Actually, the research have shown that even before ancient Athens, there are tribes in Africa, in Americas, right? North America, South America, they've already practiced their own version of democracy.
Interesting.
So it predates ancient democracy. I even think in our backyard, Malaysia, I even think maybe, and I could be wrong, the indigenous Bahasi also have some form of democracy when they govern their villages, the kampong. So this is something, because we talk about ancient Athens because this is what we're taught by the Western philosophers. It's actually richer than Athens. And philosophically, there's a lot of angles to this. You mentioned that it is seen as the ideal state, but it wasn't an ideal state. So a lot of philosophers, and we can deep dive on this. Plato actually hated democracy.
Yeah.
He actually said that democracy is rule of the ignorant over the knowledgeable, and is dangerous, right? But his student Aristotle actually had a more nuanced view, and he said that democracy in the hands of the wrong people can lead to misrule, misgovernance, and therefore you need to have, I suppose, qualified people like himself to be in power. Now again, whenever we talk on democracy, it always comes from a Western lens, and I think we have to be careful of this. Even the word democracy comes from, and actually you raised an interesting point in the beginning. Democracy isn't the only form of governance. There's autocracy, there's monarchy, there's various forms of oligarchy. You have a lot of key here, right? A lot of different forms of governance. The reason why democracy is always seen as the favorable system is because it provides freedom to as many people as possible. The idea of popular sovereignty. That the people have power, the people have the power to rule their country via representation. And therefore, democracy is seen as the best system for organizing society, but arguably may not be the most effective. Because we can talk about China and how they've been able to effectively organize their society. I'll pass it back to you. Maybe talk us more about the other philosophical angles to this, because not Western, but I suppose these ancient Greek laid the foundation, and there actually a lot more to this non-Western thinking. But maybe when democracy was developed, especially during the Enlightenment era, the idea of the consent by the governed and the governor, the ruler and the ruled, the social contract. They used to have a social contract between the state and the people, and also Thomas Hobbes, your favorite philosopher. Leviathan.
The
state reigns supreme, and the state is there to protect the people from dangers, because life is short, brutish, and nasty. And so the state has a power over the people, and so they obviously, a lot of it you can see here, the Western foundational underpinnings of democracy, but there's also criticism on the philosophical level before we go to the practical level. Then maybe you talk us through some of your thought in terms of maybe some of the other philosophies involved in this.
So, one thing that people always, misconstrue the entire discussion about democracy is they love to treat the understanding of democracy as the West speaking in a monolithic sense. Like they're speaking in unison of what democracy should be and what is the shape of democracy. Well, actually, it's quite an ecclesiastical shapes and forms of arguments regarding what democracy is. Now, in the brief, there's only, if I'm not mistaken, there's only two philosophical figure that has outlined bulk of the conversation around democracy, which is Plato, Aristotle. From Plato perspective, he got like quite a lot of criticism
Yeah.
towards the idea of democracy. Mind you, this is a time where the idea of democracy is still in its infancy.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that no, it is the first time in human history. I mean, there's arguably some evidences that civilization in Mohenjo-daro already practices some form of democracy. But this is what we kind of talk about the survivor bias of archaeological finding. Like it just happened to be like it is the most preserved civilization and record of this thing happening. But anyhow, I digress. So Plato, at this time, we said that with how democracy is formed, there are very real risks that the demagogues will steer the entire society and civilization into not into the direction of logic and rationality, but into the realm of emotionalities and irrationalities. And this is what we call one of the main criticism that will be adopted later on by other critiques of philosophy of democracy. Yeah, but people also forgot that uh, in the book that he discusses the idea of the republic of democracy, he also outlined a way to how do society escape this kind of worst case scenario of democracy. And one of the way is to first to educate the citizen, and second to have some sort of a philosophical king arrangement. Now, what does it mean by that? Philosopher king is obviously a nation guided by someone who is very competent.
Basically himself.
Basically himself. Unfortunately, he died very prematurely. He took a poison on his own. Yeah. And but the idea she continued to Aristotle, the first teacher, what we call he is the student of Plato. He devised that a correct democratic country must have some sort of differentiation between what is polity and what is democracy. Now, this is what we call the first semblance of the separation of power. If I'm not mistaken, maybe it's not between the institution, but rather between the rule and the rule. Yeah, obviously, the rule will have the must give its consent to the ruler for whatever it is. But in between both, there must exist a system that exists in the institutional between the ruler and the rule, so that they can run cohesively, and that's the makes up the essence of the democratic system. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Against the idea of single rule autocracy / absolute monarchy.
Mhm.
He also talked about mob rule.
Mm.
So didn't use the word mob rule, but the understanding is if you don't have a structured way of doing this, you will have mob rule. I think he was more careful of whatever to his teacher. The context at the time couldn't be that about this. Context, he had to be more careful. You cannot have anyone just rule the politics. So he also had a lot of things that he carried from Plato. These two philosophers will go on to shape the oldest democracy in the world, the United States. So on. If we have time, I think we can go there and see how the idea of the republic actually was born from these discussions that they've had in this time.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we must remember that the between the ancient Greeks and to the modern times, actually quite some time has been passed, a lot of times. Yeah. And in the time, people always like discussing the idea of the idea of democracy and how do we establish this. And times and times again, during the time after a lot of the Greek elements being assimilated into the Roman rule, the Roman actually also experimented with some form of republican. But then it also, how to say it, in the instance of major historical scale, it also failed, and it was replaced by the empire system. Now, as we are not merely historian enough when we're talking about this. We are also political scientists. Now, the question that we must ask is why? Why do you think that there is some failed experiments regarding democracy that happens? Like the invention of proper democratic institution can only be like it's only realized properly in our recent contemporary times rather than like thousands of years ago. What do you think?
It was a
Mhm.
Since evolution. Even when America was founded, under democracy, it's not what it is today. It's different democracy. It is actually a process. Democratic system from the 19th century, 20th century, even now, is an evolution where more and more people
Mhm.
are basically part of the democratic system. So I think we have to be careful when we talk about democracy as though there is a single model. There is no such thing as a single model.
Mhm.
It's all an evolution. European democracy different from American democracy, different from Malaysian democracy,
Mhm.
and these are all shaped by the historical context at the time. More was that a specific question?
Yeah.
Because even in these different countries have different models altogether. American democracy is shaped a lot by the Roman Republic system.
Mhm.
And not the same in Malaysian democracy, which is shaped by Westminster system. So it's very different, but the essence of it is the people have the power to decide the governance of how the society is governed at the time. I think that's the essence of it.
Mhm.
But the how actually is very different.
Very different.
The systems are very different. American system. That's why a lot of Malaysians may not understand why does the American political system look so different than the Malaysian system. And well, this is the reason why I think we have essentially different. The foundations are actually very different. We talk about it on the different models between UK, US, and the other systems that we have. But I think that's an important point because we should be careful about talking about democracy. There's no such thing as a single definition of democracy.
It's true.
There's no such thing as a single model of democracy also. This is actually a key point, I think, in the first segment. Is like, be careful when we talk about democracy. Because it doesn't only mean one thing. Yeah? He is not the Abraham Lincoln quote. He is not government, not necessarily a government
Mhm.
of the people by the people.
But the essence of it is important. Yeah.
I think it's by the people.
Run by the people.
But the question how different ways how to interpret that.
All right. Now, since we are talking about the multitudes of flavors of democracy, the question or come the polemic of I think it's only in recent time it happens in the 1940s if I'm not mistaken, which is from one of the most prominent ideologues happen to be in the camp of Islamists. Criticize. They said they contend that democracy is something that ran counter to the very core tenet of what Islam is. And, okay, for sure, we as we have to be honest with ourselves here. We, both me and Zaim, we are trained through secular education and we don't have exactly an Islamic background. But since we agree on the ground that the democracy can take so many forms, but the essence is always the rule by the people. Why do a lot of Islamists criticize it? Do you want me to give like a context before? Okay, now before we can jump into the discussion, let me give some context to the contentions by the Islamists. How and why do they criticize so much the system of democracy? Now, essentially, one of the first, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first political Islamists, which is an Islamic political theorist, which is Abu Ala al-Maududi, he contend that because of the essence of democracy is the rule by the people, effectively and functionally, it replaced the Quran as a source of law. Now, in the in a lot of interpretation and forms of government during the caliphates, the source of the law must be from the deliberation of the ulama, from the Quran and from the Sunnah, right? But when it was governed by the people, when the essence of governance is by the people, and how do we, like, people can easily vote on something that can run counter to the essence of Quran, whatever it means. I'm not necessarily agree to the sentiment, but that is what they said. And they said that Abul Ala al-Maududi, they said that this is the core tension between the sovereignty of people and the sovereignty of God. Since from the Islamist perspective, the word of God is God himself. And since the word of God should be the source of the law, then we found ourselves at a catch-22 situation. Do we want policies that are guided by the consent of the people or by the dictation of the Quran? Now, during this time, there's a lot of discussion lah, about the veracity. I don't think that we must jump very much into the intricacies of the debates, because the debates is very much, how to say it, very complex and involve a lot of terminologies and the rationalities, internal rationalities of the Quran and Islam itself. But we take it from a meta perspective. I think the reason why there's a lot of pushback against the forms of democracy, and the pushback against, how to say it, the promotion of democracy in Islamic society, I think it ties very deeply with imperialism at the time, because the expansion of democracy also means the erosion of the powers and institution of Islamic institution of all. Now, when we take this into perspective, now we kind of understand the reasoning to why the ideologues of the Islamist thinkers have so much vitriol sentiment against the ideas of democracy. Not necessarily they are against the idea of the rule of the people. They just don't want the shape of the government be emulated in the shape of the colonial government. I think that's all.
Especially contemplative thinkers, right? He actually studied in the West, and he saw in the West, I think at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, I think America, he saw how the African Americans were discriminated against by the white population. And then he saw there was a hypocrisy of democracy. You cannot call yourself a democracy if you're oppressing a part of your own people. And I think this is where they came back to Egypt. Brotherhood became extremely popular for the criticisms of imperial forms of governance, including democracy. And thinkers like this are so, I mean, he was so influential not in just Middle East, but also in our parts of the world, in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. And this idea is sort of took shape and manifested itself in a lot of the forms of political movements. I mean, even to the tamers of, say, for example, to the tamers of Islamic movement, maybe the civil society in the US, even the most extreme, say for example Boko Haram. The through line is that it is, in essence, is anti-imperialist that has somehow be in the shape of democratic government. Now, how do if the Islamists have a lot of critique against the democracy, how do they 100% rejected the the form of democracy? I don't think so, because even in Iran, if I'm not mistaken, literally an Islamic republic have their own form of democracy. Yeah, but also guided by the words of the Quran, whatever forms of interpretation they might have. Now, this is this is not to give credit to the Islamists or to people who supported the democratic ideas. This is just one of the examples to how the forms of democratic government can take multiple forms. They can be one that is suited to every and each society. And if you said, how to say the if we believe in the idea of the trajectory of history will always, Hegelian trajectory of history will always be net positive. The project of democracy is not something that this is not like a commandment from God, which you must follow this institution, and if you don't follow, then multiple disaster might follow and might befall you. No. The project of democracy is actually a long project of how to say it, tinkering some parts of democracy to make it better each iteration.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's true.
The right for majority to vote, the right of women to vote, lowering the age of the voting age. But I think interestingly, I think in countries, post-colonial countries like Malaysia, women already had the right to vote when we achieved independence. And it was never the same case for New Zealand, Australia, or UK or US for that matter. They had to fight for it. But when it came to countries like us, in a sense, we were more progressive, or maybe our colonial masters saw that, okay, the system already had that, let's give it to them. So democracy is never a single model that we think should be, that can be put in a single definition. So you have liberal democracy, social democracy, representative democracy, form of communist democracy. Even communism actually talks about democracy. So there are many forms of democracy. There's from criticism in the 19th century. Karl Marx, as many of you might know, this idea of communism, but at the time he was writing about the criticism of the conditions of the workers, which form the majority of the people, especially during the time of the Industrial Revolution. Europe, UK, and different parts of Europe. And for Karl Marx, he viewed democracy as a way for the bourgeois, the capital class, to control the masses. That if you vote, you legitimize their rule. Because at the end of the day, democracy doesn't look at the class structure. At the top of the workers will always be the bourgeoisie. And so there's no point voting because nothing will change. Essentially, that's the argument. For people to make a difference is for the workers to take over the political system and rule. And once they rule, they will eventually form a classless society. I mean, this there's a lot of nuance there, but that's basically the short of this argument. And obviously Marxism was very popular in the 19th and 20th century. It obviously collapsed during the end of the Soviet Union. Then even in communism itself, this Marxism, there's also a branch known as social democracy. Now, these are led by social democrats. These are what you find today termed as center-left, usually. Labour parties are usually social democrats, socialist democrats, social democrats. Fabian Society in the UK, Labour Party, have SDP in Germany. So these are people that believe that if Karl Marx was changing society through revolution, they change society through evolution. So gradualism. How do we gradually change society? By winning through the system itself. And after that, changes in the system that can tame the capitalist monster to serve the interests of the workers. Social democracy, as propagated by a lot of socialist democrats or social democrats on the left or center left, they run counter to left communist or Marxist theories by saying that you can change the system not through revolution, but through evolution. We can change it gradually, and eventually we'll reach a point where there will be not necessarily equality, but equitable distribution of wealth. That people will get a fair share. And it's popular, I think, the center left ideas. I don't think are as popular anymore. This 95% were workers. But we have middle class. Middle class doesn't really fall into things are also very different. We have technology. You also have a lot of people working class that support right wing, nationalist, far right ideas. The strand, I think, of criticism is still the same. There is a quote, I can't remember by who, but a lady that said, if voting can change anything, it would have been illegal. And it has a bit of a leftist tinge to this, because the idea is you can vote for whoever you want, but the system will still remain the same, regardless of whoever runs for office. And this thread of criticism actually is prevalent still in a lot of left-wing movements that argue that for as long as the economic structure is capitalist, and if your political parties are not in line with capitalist ideologies, nothing much will change. Worse, these left-wing parties will be co-opted by the capitalist system. Therefore, democracy in this liberal democracy or representative democracy in this sense doesn't really work. You need to move to a form of communism, which they argue is a form of democracy, pure democracy, where workers, proletariat, have the right to decide their fate. Very interesting criticism, and in Malaysia also, if there is Islamists in the form of FAST, right, PAS, parties, some Malaysians, they also left-wing parties that did in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, especially the Radical Party, the Progressive Party at one point. The left-wing parties, many of them actually were clamped down and essentially disbanded by the British, but also by the early Merdeka government led by Tunku Abdul Rahman. So there are different strands. And interestingly, Luqman, the different strands, Islamists, leftists, participate in democracy.
It's true. Yeah. It's true. Yeah, I would like to go to the next segment, which is just a comparison to the big umbrella of the democratic government that we have in the world. But before that, I would like to ask you, Zaim.
Yeah.
Right. I noticed something now. Whenever we talk about democracy as a political science student, or you want to learn, the civic duties in general, we sort of talk about this kind of ideas, on a very surface level. This is quite advanced, actually. But in surface level, in terms of, we try to put the idea of democracy and the contention in a distinct and discrete boxes, like a spectrum. Do you think that, we should somehow move beyond that, or we should still stick to this, and just take it as something that, oh, this is the best that we got. What do you think?
Excellent question. So if you think of that spectrum, you have old school representative democracy, legislative parliament, legislative chamber. Now on the other side, suppose you have small scale directly governed commune, where people decide, right? Direct democracy. Yeah? In between, you probably have participatory democracy, where they are more active in between elections and they hold their reps accountable. I think democracy is more of a journey.
Journey.
I think what happened is, and actually I have a lot of faith. Looking at the current events, if you look at the Gen Z wave, I don't know what they call it, the Gen Z revolution. What has happened in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka,
Mexico recently.
in Mexico.
Yeah.
It's new to me. In where else? A few countries, Asia, Nepal, where young people that feel, as has previous generations have felt, that the representatives do not speak for them, or there's a gap between the people and the representative. There's a gap. Then the gap has gotten too big that the young people say enough is enough. We have to reset, and we have to reset the system. But they didn't gravitate to other forms of governance. They didn't go to autocracy, one man to rule all. They didn't go to oligarchy. They didn't go to aristocracy.
Much better form of democracy.
They said, we want to say in democracy. And if you think of, we had this pre-podcast chat a few days ago about the Switzerland model, California model, where in between elections, you might even have more democratic measures to essentially vote on important policy issues. Taxes. Can we vote on taxes? Don't raise taxes. Yes, no. Vote on maybe immigration policy. Vote on a slew of sensitive issues, social issues. So I think that if you think of democracy as a journey, right, as opposed to different forms, okay, whatever that we have now, today, in whatever country you're in, right, Malaysia, can we make this 10% better? Not 100%, right? I'm a bit more Fabian, I'm a bit more gradualist, but can we make this 10% better? And in our case, is that can we get the third vote? So I live in the capital city, Kuala Lumpur. We only have one vote. We used to have two votes when we were under Selangor. You vote for the federal MP. If you live in a state, you vote for your state assembly person. The third vote, I think, is a local council elections.
Local council election.
So this is the third vote. So I think the 10% for Malaysia is, can we get the third vote? Can we vote for the local governments? Can we vote for our municipal city councils? That's 10%, right? And once we get that one, we have to figure out what's the other 10%. Can we get constitution hearing parliament for ministers? I think I would love for parliament to decide whether the minister can be approved.
True.
The journey is important. How do we think of democracy as a journey? Because people watching it, whether you're young or old, it doesn't matter. You have to think about how can we make the democracy stronger by holding your representatives accountable. You're not happy and tell them you're not happy. Democracy only works when you do the work also. It's not just about voting. Voting is the bare minimum. In between elections is what actually matters.
I think now we go to our second segment. Since we're talking about trying to separate the issues and making the government a bit pretty smaller but effective, much more responsive to the local needs, right? So in the brief, actually, the first in the list is the US model. But I would like to not really skip, but to shuffle it back to order, which is go straight to the Chinese model first. Yeah, the Chinese model first, because I think it is much more relevant to what we are discussing here. Plus, we only got like 27 minutes left. And something you said about the Swiss model and the multiple ways of making the democratic government much more responsive. And one thing is, yes, I think that's the trend now, that with a lot of riots and the social revolution that happens all across the world, they did not deviate. Even, for example, even the Arab Spring, they did not deviate from the demands. They want a better democracy. They didn't want to say that, oh, we should establish, global caliphate all over again. No. The trend is always wanting a better democracy, right? But so anyhow, one little anecdote talking about making local issues a third vote and so on and so forth. Let me tell you a story of China. Chinese government people, a lot of Western political analysts and from people from Europe, they said, "Oh, China is a dictatorship and authoritarian government. It's only one party." Yes, from if you ask any people, even the government representative, they say, "Yes, we have one party government, but we also have democracy." And what do they mean by that? At first, when I encountered this sort of reasoning, I was like, dumbfounded myself, like how you call yourself democracy if you only have one party? And from how they shape the government, it's actually quite interesting. So they have layers of government. At the very top, they have the standing committee. You can correct me later on if there's some information. I'm not really a China expert, but this is just what I know. At the very top, they have a standing committee, and the standing committee will decide on the fields of like foreign relations, on defense, on the general direction of the economic machinery, if I'm not mistaken, the fiscal matters and so on and so forth. At below the standing committee, they have the Politburo. Now, the separation between the Politburo and the Standing Committee is actually not that different. Like, it's like a first among equal model. So the Politburo, they also have this committee of people, of top-ranking political party officers that's going to decide on big matters, like for example foreign relations, as I said earlier. And then we have like multiple other congress. This congress will decide on matters that are revolve like internally lah, like education, like internal security and the state, economic, and the state relation, state provincial relation, so on and so forth. But what's more interesting is
this like the TV, you see the thousand people.
the 1,000 people. I think they convene like how many times per year?
Yeah, it's not once a year actually. Probably a few times a year.
Yeah, and they even like give seats to a lot of other organizations, like civil society organization, and so on and so forth. But what's more important that relevant to our discussion is how they shape the government at the local level. So at the local level, people say that at the local level they have like party office and actually they vote on stuff locally. One example that I can give about the success of this model is when Xi Jinping wanted to initiate the elimination of poverty policy. I forgot what's the name of the policy is. He said, we wanted to eliminate strict poverty level. So what did he do? First, Xi Jinping instructed through all these layers of bureaucracy down to the very local level to get the information first. So the party officials at a very local level, they will collect information about the people surrounding them, their own community, and they relegate it back. And this back and forth of information gives the whole party a rough a rough picture on how should they direct the resources of the government. And we can argue that the successes of the policy might not be as impressive, but the thing is the local population is satisfied with the how it was conducted. And you can see, all across China, even the small villages say that the tangible and real improvement to their life, like houses are built, highways are built. Whenever the people outside of China, when they talk about China, they said, well, why are they building roads to nowhere? No, it's actually roads to somewhere. It's only to the rural places, right? The main project is to connect them. Yeah, it's not to build infrastructure where it was projected to, it was needed. But
there are village elections.
Yeah, they have village election. That's how they manage.
But then they elect at the district or municipal level. It actually goes up. So it's a form of direct non-liberal democracy.
Yeah.
So non-liberal because obviously they have a different understanding of social liberties, civil liberties. Not to say they don't have, but they're different understanding. It's not the same as I think Western liberal democracy or upholding civil liberties. Liberties are there. When we went to China, I think we had a different understanding of China also. All we thought was this oppressive country. When we went there, it wasn't. People that were actually, they lived their life normally.
It's true.
There was no sense of, I suppose, oppression. I mean, this is from our observation.
Yeah.
This was something that the West did.
Actually, we can gauge if this form of government didn't really work or it doesn't really, we can see a lot of mismatch between the ground level people and the central government, and how the biggest tell is always the biggest tell between, like, if people are unsatisfied with the government, is the participatory rate will always drop. But in China, the participatory rate is always at the constant high level. As compared to now, we go to countries like go to US. Now the US is if one of the foremost country that have initiated
being influenced by the Roman Republic system, where obviously US they fought against an absolute monarchy, the British Empire. They were actually colonies of the British Empire, and they actually have very strict separation of powers: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. And there are clear separations between the three branches. Unlike the Westminster, which we'll discuss later, legislative and executive are combined. US not like that. You vote directly for your president, and your president cannot introduce laws or bills in their legislative assembly, which is the Congress. And the courts, the highest court, Supreme Court of the United States, can strike down any laws or even actions of the president. There is a very strong separation of powers between the three branches. Something that I think is commendable. This is why I think in America, even when the president wants to do something outrageous, there are actually very strong controls, institutional controls against the president.
there's a lot of stop gaps.
I think, if we're being honest, the more recent years, I think we have seen an erosion of the three separations of power. You've seen how, because the president appoints the Supreme Court judges, now in the Supreme Court, majority are actually from one party, aligned to one party only. So a lot of the decisions are being educated legally favors one side, the conservatives. In Congress, also, Congress leaders pay a lot of attention to the president when they're supposed to be independent. So there is an erosion of the three separations of power envisioned by their founding fathers. Now, look, US is not perfect. Oldest democracy, but we talked earlier about civic participation. Civic participation is very important in democracy. If people don't feel they own their country, own their system, they don't go out to vote. So when they don't go out to vote, you have a legitimacy issue in the US. The US have always struggled with turnout. Even I think of them, 70% is considered high. Malaysia, we're 80%.
Yeah.
Because that's normal.
Yeah, and we're fighting over the 20%. Yeah.
Which makes it more complicated. And that also is another issue. The states actually have a lot of powers. And there is a true federation. Central government, you have the different states, and states actually have a lot of powers, as opposed to countries like Malaysia, where on paper the states have some power, but states actually have the decision-making process is centralized by the executive branch at the expense of the other two branches. Now, this contrast, let me just jump in because of time. Contrast with the UK Westminster system, where the Westminster system combines the legislative and the executive. So when you vote for your member of parliament via the through elections, you're voting them in parliament. And members of parliament form the executive branch. The prime minister comes, the member of parliament, the prime minister has to be from the parliament, the upper house or lower house. In countries because in Malaysia, it has to be, I suppose the prime minister has to be from the lower house. And the courts is independent. The courts are independent, but again, the prime minister also has they shape who gets to sit on the highest court of the land. So the separation of powers in Malaysia, so in UK and Westminster systems like Malaysia are not strong because of the combination between the executive and the legislative branch. Just a quick point on electoral systems. Now, this is the key term, first past the post. First past the post, basically when you have three candidates, candidate one gets 5 votes, candidate two gets 4 votes, candidate three gets 3 votes, and one still wins 5. Not majority, that's called a polarity.
Polarity.
So the wins. What happens in the first past the post systems is usually because you vote based on party lines, you actually have very decisive majorities by one or two parties. Right? Now, interestingly, some countries have introduced proportional or representative voting systems. And these are the more interesting. So I take the example of US because I had the chance to vote in the US, even at the level. At the upper house, the Senate, you can vote. So you're given a ballot. The ballot is not like Malaysia where you tick for the parties. They actually give you a ballot. You can vote above the line. The above the line means it's a ticket. The party selects the candidates and you vote for all the candidates, or you vote below the line. You pick the candidate and you put preference.
So you rank them.
You rank them. So you have 10 candidates, you rank candidate to 10. Because if you don't do that, they vote the line because there's too much hope. You have to
Yeah.
And so what happens is the vote is not wasted, is transferred. So your vote on the 10th, even the 10th preferred candidate, their vote is transferred. So no matter who you vote, their vote can be transferred to eventually the winning candidate. And so what happens is candidates are less adversarial. They try to do coalition building. So they know, okay, if I'm team A, team B, team C, team D, team A and B will gang up. Say, okay, we'll work together. So you vote for us, right? So vote for them and then they'll do preference. So your vote is constantly transferred and eventually the one with the highest preference wins. And so what it means in practical terms is in the Senate, you have smaller parties in the Senate because this system, proportional representation, allows smaller parties to be part of parliament because the vote is not wasted. So it's very, very interesting. It's a bit complicated. If we were to do this in Malaysia, people will get a bit pending. Like, oh my God, how do we vote? But again, above the line, below the line. So to make things easier, you usually vote above the line. You allow the party to do the preference selection for you. So for example, Labour would align with Greens. And then the Liberal Conservative will align with the Conservative parties.
Do you think that this is the better democratic system?
It's actually an amazing system. It's actually complicated. And proportional representation actually, unlike political scientists, it has a lot to do with maths.
Maths, huh?
Maths. So you have to get the maths right. There's a lot of basis. How do you do preferential voting is actually very complicated. At the end of the day, your vote is not wasted. So for example, in Malaysia, when you vote for the independent candidate, people say they're wasting your vote because it goes nowhere. But in Australia, in other Nordic countries, it's never wasted. Never be transferred to candidate. Eventually, it will land to.
Every single voice matter.
It will land to two. Eventually, yes.
Yeah.
Cover the 10 minutes we have left. Maybe we talk about Malaysia.
Yeah, can. Yeah, actually, there is quite an interesting segue to Malaysia because you said just now that it is one of the better democratic system, the electoral system. So one thing that I can, the critique lah, the usual critique of proportional representation, any STV, single transferable votes, all this multitudes of electoral system. If we ever wanted to apply this to Malaysia, I think what would happen to the local seats, because it means one thing lah, because coalition building, right, it comes at the cost of the local seats and how it was. So how do we make a pitch to not only to the people, but to the political class that, oh, this is actually a better system.
PR, right?
Yeah.
Presentation.
Yeah.
This voting, obviously, there's the bottom, yeah. They're actually different, but they're different voting methodologies, yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned one STV. Many. You don't start in general elections. You start at schools, universities, lower stakes elections, local council. So you need to do you have to do a pilot project, but you start at low stakes election first. Even NGOs, why do you experiment doing this? Because it actually encourages more political parties and people to come out as candidates. Because if not, if you follow the first past the post system, it only favors the big parties. If you have big parties with big resources, you're going to win the election. Because if you only have one shot and you cannot waste that, you're going to vote for the biggest parties in the country.
So you're by having these like low stakes elections first, you prime the people.
The people to say, oh, you really learn how to do it.
Like simple.
You study even Tadika, kindergarten. Yeah, I think in I'm gonna get this wrong, but one of the Scandinavian countries, democracy starts at school. So the students decide what they're gonna have for lunch. So I think it's fascinating. For example, should phones be banned in school? And you allow the students to vote, and then as teachers you respect that vote. That will teach to people when they turn 18 years old. Democracy is an everyday thing. Vote for your prefect, vote for your food menu, vote for development funds and the school. That that level of civic awareness and participation would encourage more democracy at the at the lower level, and will eventually bring up. Because like it or not, people are smart and people sometimes just want to have a say. The reason why there's so much pent up anger sometimes is because people don't have the avenue to vent the anger. I'm angry, right?
Yeah.
But then I can only vote once every 5 years.
It's true. Yeah.
But you need to give them avenue to vote, to express how they're feeling. And people in state. Even your neighborhood rukut tangga, your neighborhood watch, there should be democracy at all levels. Start there, you will not go wrong. And And then you wouldn't have any debates about, oh, should young people be allowed to vote? Yes, they should be allowed to vote. Because the argument that, oh, these people are not mature. Look, man, girls are also not mature, right?
It's true. Yeah.
Civic participation actually is the number one indicator of any democracy. People feeling that they own this country. And honestly, in Malaysia, huge segment of people don't feel they are part of the conversation. Because the race, age, the region,
Yeah.
these factors are actually a lot of factors. People don't feel like,
Yeah.
why should I participate in democracy? Would it change anything?
It's true. Whatever happens, that
Yeah.
it happens.
Yeah.
So speaking about the democracy in this level, and how do we improve our system of democracy, something that I noticed is the importance of, we couldn't stress this enough. The idea of democracy is something that is inherently Western. No, yeah. It is just one of the ways that we manage ourselves. For example, if you are followers of a certain political party and you have a very strong say, you have a very strong opinion to how the nation should govern, right? To get your view across, the best way is the proportional voting, the proportional representation, and that's like, that is cross beyond any political ideologies or whatever. Rationally, it is one of the ways that you can champion your voice. But other than that, it's not really as bad as people make it out to be. So but one thing, like, if say I want to ask you now, if tomorrow we're going to deliver a memorandum to the election commission, are the four things you wanna? Well, three things. Three things. What are three things that you wanna say?
Oh, this is tough. I think I'll start with the philosophical thing. I think democracy is a branding issue. Branding issue, because people think that in Indonesia, right? Oh, it's a Western thing. It's not Western thing. Right? The only problem is because if you Google this through LLM, ChatGPT, Aristotle and Plato comes up. That shouldn't be the case. We need to have our own indigenous thinkers that talk about democracy, which unfortunately we don't really have. Maybe they have already spoken to it 1,500 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? But it's just not there.
Yeah.
Right? So there is a branding issue when it comes to democracy. So in case of the election commission, election in Malaysia is fun. And so we have to make it as fun as possible. It has to be festival. Never like. Make it fun to vote.
Make it fun to vote.
Mm-hmm. People have to, when they vote, it has to be fun.
Yeah.
So one is important. You have to introduce it at multiple levels. Don't start at the general election. Don't start at the state election. Everywhere.
Start everywhere.
Okay, then. Your clan association, your persatuan, everything, unions. You must have an element of democracy. Make it culture. It is a culture, actually.
Yeah.
Just because we don't formally doesn't mean democracy is not there. Democracy is there, right? People know when people are not happy. And they still want to they still want to understand the thoughts of the people to understand, okay, something is wrong here. But make sure the mechanism is there. 3, we have to move away, and I don't know how, but for SPR, I see it is to have this idea that do not be tribal with your political parties.
What do you mean by tribal? This is very interesting.
Yeah, closest neighbor. I mean, one of the closest neighbor. You can be in the opposition party and still be a cabinet minister in the president's cabinet. You can be a minister, but you can be from opposing party. That would never happen in Malaysian democracy. Obviously, we have the vice minister system, no doubt. Opposition, we're very clear cut. But we have to move away from the idea that if I have this party, I cannot vote with this party. And obviously, things have changed since the last election. Now there are obviously parties that were sworn enemies that are now working together. But we have to move away from the idea that my party is right, your party is wrong. No, all parties are right and wrong.
Even internally, like, you can have disagreement. Yeah.
The Minister of Human Resources, Stephen Sim, which, by the way, is one of the amazing philosophical thinker. And he talked about this doctor from Bukit Batajam. I believe he was a state assemblyman for Butterworth or
Mount Sharp Hill.
And he's Indian, Hindu. And he was an associate member of UMNO in the 1990s.
Wow.
So remember when on Jafar, he left the party, right? The idea of he want to open up to non-Malays, and it took off. But it wasn't implemented fully. So Tun Tan Sien Loh, the MC president, was an associate member of UMNO. Was this fact. But here's the thing, at the time, dual membership was allowed.
No, we
You
should.
can be, see, no problem, no issue. We have to bring back this idea that political parties are not your identity.
Mm.
You can be, you should be in many parties. You shouldn't be afraid to be part of any parties and change. Okay, look, I'm not happy with that. I'm going to go to another party. That shouldn't be sacrosanct. It shouldn't be hard.
Yeah.
It should be something that, okay, I'm not happy, I'm going to go to another party. Do not fall down with the party and do not be tribalistic with the party because that's how democracy works.
Yeah, we're supposed to work together towards a better future for the country.
That's my
Not for my party. Yeah.
thing. Country and party, cannot.
Party, yeah, cannot.
Well, when it comes to, it's important, democracies, but it shouldn't be like in Malaysia where it's treated like, so, like you're part of your identity. Relax, guys.
Yeah.
Relax.
Exactly.
Do that party.
Yeah. So I think we are reaching the end.
This is a heavy episode.
Yeah, very heavy.
Your advice for our viewers when they think about democracy, any key takeaways for them, any actionable.
I think one thing that I want to leave our viewer with is if you have any disagreement with the ideas of democracy and how democracy should be, then you should air it out. Just air it out, say your piece, and then you must have this kind of mindset that you wanted to add value to things. Not necessarily, I don't agree with how things are run. Does it not mean that I should divorce or run away from the system or, be distracted to the system? But you must add something to the system. I don't like how this is supposed to run. And then, perhaps I should be an advocate to how things should be. Then that's how we can be open to any discussion for, especially regarding the ideas of democracy. Yeah.
Okay, we'll call it a day.
We call it a day.
3.
Episode 3.
We'll see you. Thank you for watching Sidang Back.
All right. Ciao. Yes. Yep.